I'm Raul. We're here at Westside Training Center in West Los Angeles. I'm here again with Eric Flores.
Hey guys.
Okay, so we have a question that I think probably everyone here who has like a jiu-jitsu background has probably discussed, or at least you hear it. And then we also get this question from time to time, or this comment where people would say like, "Oh well, you definitely need to spend time doing jiu-jitsu," and so Brazilian jiu-jitsu, so that means with the gi on, right, to improve your no-gi or your basically your no-gi game, right?
Right.
So we're going to talk about that right now. Like, is that true? I mean, does wearing clothes make your no-gi game better, right? So do you want to kind of start off here?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, last time I wore a gi or a kimono was Taekwondo. Mm-hmm. And then I wrestled in high school, which is folk style wrestling, amateur wrestling. And then when I got into my 20s, I wanted to do BJJ. But I felt like no-gi was the most natural transition for me. And I could tell even back then that the gi game was a different game than the no-gi game. And I just had no desire. So I'm also talking from a perspective that I've never done one gi class in my life in BJJ. So I'm going to say that at the beginning. But as time is going on, my beliefs or convictions have kind of been echoed more through other practitioners. And I don't think any professor or coaches have ever been disrespectful toward me. They've always just kind of lovingly, jokingly said, "Eric, if you're going to get your no-gi game better, you got to do gi, man. You got to do gi." And, you know, they're just kind of pushing gi everywhere around the world I've been, or different schools I've trained at, different coaches I've had. Training partners could be jerks in some way, but coaches and professors, I will say that they've always been nice about it. But they've just said, well, if you want your no-gi game to improve, you got to put the gi on, man. And I always kind of respectfully disagreed. I just kind of stuck to my guns, and some of my training partners even called me rogue, you know, from the very beginning. But I was just even sharing with you, Coach, that even nowadays on jiu-jitsu websites, they'll have a description of every martial art they teach, especially if it's an MMA gym. And they will put on their own website, these black belt professors, in the no-gi section, or they'll call it submission wrestling or submission grappling, they'll put a faster, more high-paced, faster game or art. So it takes a little more speed, a little more athleticism, because there's no grips. Because you can't grab on. You're not allowed, for a while you were allowed to grab on your own shorts, your own board shorts, or if you had sprawl or whatever. But in tournaments, I heard that's even illegal in some ways. So no-gi, you're not allowed to grab any clothing. Where in gi, you can grab a lot of clothing, and they call them grips. So they even acknowledge that, and I think also what I've observed in my training and sparring, and a lot of these gi guys, they'll even admit to me, they're like, "Man, well, that was a good roll, but I would have been able to maybe do better against you if this was a gi." You know, it's like if I had a quarter for every time someone told me that, like I would have done better against you, or I would have submitted you if this was a gi game. Yeah. You know, if I had grips, or if we started a certain way, and I always kind of didn't know how to take that. You know, I would really usually say no comment. And then a lot of the same gi guys, they'll do really well in tournaments, like get even gold, but they barely make bronze and no gi. And a lot of them want to do gi, and sometimes they'll even admit to me they're scared to do no gi because they know it's a different game, because the gi slows you down. Yeah. Because you're grabbing onto someone, or they're grabbing onto you. And so I've always felt as the years gone by that, yes, they are different games. I don't know if I necessarily agree with the gi would improve my no-gi. I've done fairly well at no-gi all these years. And again, I respect it, but I just don't, it's just not my thing. Yeah. You know.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's a really good perspective. Also, actually, I do like gi classes. I don't teach them. I'll participate. And I would have to believe, or I would have to agree that it's different. I mean, because you have like something that someone's trying to grab onto. The thing also is that, like, oftentimes like your jacket will move. You know, so you have to realize that you don't necessarily have that great a control over the person's body by grabbing their clothing. Because it can shift, because it's not like it's really secure there. It's just like two lapels, and you just like, the clothes kind of, one flap goes over the other, and then a belt is kind of over that, so it's not the most secure thing. But what I found, and also I've been hearing it also from some of the students who take my class, and then also do the gi classes, is that like I'm teaching like grabbing onto the person's body, and so those who've studied with me longer, they're realizing that even in the gi classes, if they rely on grabbing the person's body, that's not going to be like shifting around, like the way clothing would. So they're finding more success in gi. So I'd actually want to turn that whole like argument around and say, well, perhaps no gi helps gi,
Helps
right?
your gi, helps your gi game.
Yeah. So if you're really good at like say the wrestling fundamentals, also not necessarily relying on the clothing. I mean, it's good. You got to know like these different chokes and all these like lapel chokes or whatever that are part of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But I think with a lot of the wrestling fundamentals, you can safely like not get submitted with these things. Like using all the different wrestling counters, but also keeping control of the person's body by actually like grabbing onto their body as opposed to their clothing, which can shift. Maybe the pants not so. Well, even the pants, depending on how loose they are.
Right.
Like
right.
they'll often like end up like really high up. Or actually they will oftentimes nowadays like guys are wearing like these almost like capri pants, right? So so if you might try to grab onto that, and like those of you guys who know like some of the jiu-jitsu terminology, like even if they're kind of back and you're doing some kind of toreando type thing, or you're grabbing onto maybe their pants, but oftentimes when they're kind of shifting around, it does kind of like just come right up. So I think you can't really rely on the clothes keeping them in a position where you can control them.
Right.
Right. But you can rely on like say grabbing that wrist, grabbing around the head, grabbing even around their legs or ankles, and that can keep them in place where you can kind of control and move the rest of your body to get around their guard or whatever happens to be, whatever the situation happens to be.
Yeah, I think also too, Coach, it's like, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's kind of how no-gi was born, really, was even as we go into the MMA world. I think Eddie Bravo saw all these guys are shirtless, first of all, and they are wearing kind of board shorts and knee pads and gloves, and he actually was trained in the gi for many, many years, and I think he got his black belt, Eddie Bravo of 10th Planet, under Machado, who was a gi guy, traditional Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy, and is Brazilian. And he wanted to be innovative, not just of the rubber guard, but he started the no-gi push because of what he saw in the UFC early on in MMA, how gi training wasn't really as effective. When Hoist did it, a lot of people didn't know that you can even use that as a weapon. Because even if you watch gi now, guys would just grab their lapel and grab it it's like a foreign object and use it to wrap around the guy's neck and choke him. A lot of guys were clueless back in the early 90s. So I think Eddie Bravo wasn't trying to disrespect the gi, or because I've seen documentaries on him, but just say that maybe no gi is better training even for MMA. But it could be a good argument that no gi will help your gi game. So again, I respect those guys, and I think there's a lot of studs in the gi game, but again, for me personally, I never agreed with the gi helping my no gi game. Yeah.
So I think that's the counter that we're sending out there too, because we get this comment a few times about like, oh, gi helping the no gi, but maybe let's turn it back at those people and say, well, we think gi or no gi is helping the gi game. So why don't you guys try no gi for a while and then see if it doesn't help your gi game, right?
Yeah. Take some no gi classes, more no gi classes.
Yeah. I believe it'll improve it.